funny how the world works when no one is watching. You do something small, quiet, almost forgettable, and the crowd never claps because the crowd never knew. No cameras, no applause, no name attached to the act, just you, a choice in a moment that could have gone either way. You helped someone who didn't look important, didn't sound powerful, to announce who they really were, and that's the part that matters, because the truth is, heaven doesn't keep score the way people do. It doesn't care about appearances, status, or how impressive the story sounds when it's told later. It watches intent. It watches restraint. It watches what you do when there's nothing to gain, and no one to impress through character. Doesn't show up when the lights are on. It doesn't wait for permission, doesn't pose for approval, doesn't straighten its posture because someone important might be watching. It shows up in the quiet moments, the uncomfortable ones, the seconds where no one would ever know what you chose unless you decided to confess it later. That's where the mask slips. That's where people reveal who they are, without the performance, without the script, without the reward dangling in front of them. When no one is watching, there's no incentive to pretend, and that's exactly why the truth leaks out. Most people behave like they're constantly on a stage. Even when they think they're alone, they're still imagining an audience, still narrating their actions as if someone might someday hear the story. They do good because it feels good to be seen doing good. They help because the idea of being praised is stitched into the act itself. But remove the audience, strip away the possibility of recognition, erase the future bragging rights, and suddenly the room gets very quiet. Choices become heavier. Motives get exposed. And that's when character either steps forward or disappears entirely when no one is watching. Kindness costs more. There's no applause to soften the effort, no validation to justify the inconvenience. Helping someone when it benefits you is easy. Helping someone when it costs you time, energy, pride, or comfort, and gives you nothing in return is where the real test begins. That's where you find out whether your values are real or just decorative. Because anyone can play the role of a good person when the world is keeping score, but only a few continue playing it when the scoreboard is gone. There's a strange freedom in being unobserved, too. Without eyes on you, you're not bound by expectation. You're not performing morality, you're practicing it. And practice is messy. It's inconsistent. It's quiet. It doesn't always feel noble. Sometimes it feels inconvenient, annoying, unnecessary. Sometimes it feels pointless. And yet, those are the moments that define you more accurately than any public gesture ever could. Because character isn't a highlight reel, it's a habit. It's what you default to when there's no reward waiting at the end. People like to believe they're good because they've done good things, but the question isn't what you've done. It's why you did it. And whether you'd still do it if the outcome were erased, if no one thanked you, if no one noticed, if the act dissolved into nothing the moment it happened. That's where honesty begins. That's where self-deception loses its grip. Because deep down, everyone knows when they're acting and when they're being. And the silence of being unseen is loud enough to expose that difference. There's also fear in those moments. Fear of being taken advantage of. Fear of wasting effort. Fear of doing the right thing and being left with nothing to show for it. And that fear is revealing. It shows how transactional people have become, how conditioned they are to measure worth by return. When no one is watching, the transaction disappears, and what remains is intent. Raw, unfiltered intent. Do you help because it aligns with who you are, or because it enhances who you appear to be? The world reward spectacle. It remembers grand gestures, dramatic sacrifices, public declaration, but it's shaped by small, quiet decisions that never make it into stories. The moment you choose patience instead of cruelty when you could have gotten away with it. The moment you choose honesty instead of convenience when lying would have been easier. The moment you help someone without knowing who they are or what they're worth. Those moments don't echo loudly, but they accumulate. They carve patterns into your behavior. They harden into identity. And here's the uncomfortable part. When no one is watching, you don't get to blame pressure or expectation or circumstance. There's no excuse, no narrative shield. The choice is yours, naked and undeniable. You either step forward or you don't. You either act with integrity or you reveal that integrity was conditional all along. And once you see that about yourself, you can't unsee it. The mirror doesn't shatter just because you don't like the reflection. True character isn't proven by what you announce. It's proven by what you don't announce. It's built in moments that vanish the second they pass, moments that leave no evidence except the subtle way they reshape you. And the frightening thing is that those moments are happening all the time, stacking quietly, shaping who you're becoming without ever asking for your permission, without ever checking whether you're ready to face what they reveal, without ever caring whether anyone else will know what you did when the world wasn't looking. Kindness without recognition is heavy in a way most people don't understand. Not heavy like applause or praise, not heavy like a reward you can point to and say, "This is mine." Heavy like carrying something no one sees, something that presses inward instead of outward. People love kindness when it's loud, when it sparkles, when it comes with a story attached. They love it when it turns into a moment, a headline, a reason to be admired. But strip all that away and watch how uncomfortable things get. Take away the witnesses, take away the credit, take away the chance that anyone will ever know. And suddenly kindness becomes inconvenient, suspicious, even foolish in the eyes of a world trained to ask, "What's in it for me?" Because recognition changes the math. When someone knows they'll be seen, their kindness is lighter, easier to lift. There's a payoff waiting at the end, even if it's just a smile of approval or a quiet sense of superiority. But when there's no recognition, no future acknowledgement, no hidden audience, the act stands alone. There's no transaction, no exchange, just a decision made in silence. And that silence is where the weight lies. That's where the act presses against your ego, your patience, your sense of fairness, and asks whether you're willing to do something good without being rewarded for being good. Most people aren't. Not because they're evil, but because they've been trained to equate value with visibility. If it doesn't get noticed, it feels like it doesn't count. If no one knows, it feels wasted. So kindness becomes performative, shaped and polished for maximum impact. People help when it benefits their image, when it reinforces the story they want others to believe about them. But unseen kindness doesn't support a story. It doesn't build a reputation. It doesn't protect you from judgment. It just exists quietly, and then it's gone, leaving nothing behind except the subtle shift it makes inside you, and that's what makes it dangerous. Kindness without recognition forces you to confront your own motives. It strips away the comfort of external validation and leaves you alone with the question you'd rather not answer. Would you still do this if no one ever thanked you, remembered you, or returned the favor? That question makes people uneasy because it exposes how conditional their morality really is. How often good behavior is tied to expectation, to outcome, to reward. When those things disappear, kindness becomes a burden. And not everyone is willing to carry it. There's also a kind of quiet courage in it. Helping without recognition means accepting that your effort might dissolve into nothing, that it might change nothing, that it might never come back to you in any form. It means acting without control over the narrative, without proof that what you did mattered. And in a world obsessed with impact and results, that feels like madness. Why give energy where there's no return? Why invest where there's no guarantee? Why be kind when the universe isn't keeping receipts? But that's exactly why it carries weight. Because it isn't strategic. It isn't calculated. It isn't insurance against guilt or loneliness or judgment. It's an expression of who you are when there's nothing to gain. And that kind of action reshapes you in ways recognition never could. Praise can inflate you, distort you, trap you into repeating acts for the sake of applause. Unseen kindness humbles you. It reminds you that doing the right thing isn't about being right in front of others. It's about being aligned with yourself. There's a strange discipline to it too. It teaches restraint. It teaches you to let go of the urge to announce, to explain, to justify. It forces you to sit with the discomfort of being unacknowledged. Resist the temptation to turn a quiet act into a loud confession. And in that restraint, something sharpens. You become less dependent on external affirmation, less reactive to how others perceive you, less interested in being seen as good, more focused on simply being decent in moments that don't make noise. And here's the part people don't like to admit. Kindness without recognition changes the balance of power. When you act without needing credit, you're no longer controlled by the audience. You're not negotiating your values based on who's watching. You're free to act according to principle instead of performance. That kind of freedom is unsettling because it removes excuses. You can't say you didn't help because it wouldn't matter. You can't say you didn't act because it wouldn't be noticed. You either chose to do it or you didn't. Unseen kindness also has a way of moving quietly through the world. It doesn't announce itself, but it ripples. The person who received it may never know its full weight, but it alters something. It interrupts a pattern. It softens an edge. It changes a moment that could have gone another way. And even if it doesn't, even if it disappears without a trace, it still leaves its mark where it matters most, in the habit you build, the instincts you reinforce. The version of yourself you're slowly becoming through choices no one applauds, no one records, no one remembers. Choices that accumulate silently, shaping you in the dark, teaching you to carry weight without asking the world to acknowledge that you're carrying anything at all. Appearances are comforting lies. They let people feel safe, let them categorize, dismiss, underestimate, move on without thinking too hard. A clean suit means authority. Worn shoes mean insignificance. A loud voice means power. A quiet one must mean weakness. That's the fairy tale everyone agrees to believe because it keeps the world simple and predictable. But the truth doesn't live on the surface. It hides underneath, watching people trip over their own assumptions, smiling quietly while influence moves in silence. Unseen power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. The ones who truly hold leverage rarely look like they do. They don't flash it, don't decorate themselves with symbols, don't remind you every 5 minutes of who they are. They blend in, they listen, they wait. And while everyone else is busy posturing, demanding respect, performing importance, real influence is already at work, nudging outcomes, bending directions, shaping futures without ever stepping into the spotlight. People confuse noise with strength and visibility with control. They trust what looks impressive and ignore what feels ordinary. That's why appearances are such effective disguises. The most dangerous individuals don't look dangerous. The most powerful minds don't look intimidating. The deepest influence often comes wrapped in humility, anonymity, or even vulnerability. And that's not an accident. It's strategy, whether conscious or instinctive. When you're underestimated, people lower their guard. They speak freely. They reveal intention. They show you who they really are because they don't think you matter. And that's where unseen power thrives. It feeds on disregard. It grows in the shadows of assumption. When someone thinks you're insignificant, they stop protecting themselves around you. They stop filtering. They stop calculating. And suddenly, you see the machinery behind the curtain. You see how decisions are made, how egos drive outcomes, how fragile the structures of authority really are. Influence isn't about standing above others. It's about understanding them while they are busy ignoring you. Appearances also give people permission to judge lazily. It's easier to decide who matters based on looks, status, tone, or presentation than to pay attention, to listen closely, to stay curious. And that laziness creates blind spots, massive ones. Blind spots where power slips through unnoticed. History is full of examples where the quiet, overlooked, dismissed figures were the ones who shift everything, not by force, but by timing, insight, patience, and proximity. There's something unsettling about realizing how much control exists without spectacle. It challenges the idea that power must be visible to be real. It exposes how vulnerable systems are to subtle pressure instead of open confrontation. A whispered word in the right ear can outweigh a shouted command. A small decision made quietly can dismantle years of loud effort. And the people who understand this don't rush to prove themselves. They let others underestimate them, because underestimation is leverage. Unseen power also reveals something uncomfortable about how people treat each other. When you think someone has nothing to offer, you treat them carelessly. You interrupt them, you dismiss them, you overlook them, and in doing so, you expose your own character. You reveal that your respect is conditional. tied to status and benefit rather than humanity. That's why appearances are such effective filters. They show who respects only power and who respects people. There's a reason some doors open quietly. Some opportunities don't arrive with announcements or guarantees. They appear as ordinary moments, casual interactions, brief encounters with people who don't seem important at the time. And most people miss them because they're trained to look for spectacle. They're waiting for grandeur, for confirmation, for proof that something matters before they engage. Meanwhile, influence slips by unnoticed, carried by someone they didn't bother to see. Understanding that appearances lie changes how you move through the world. You stop assuming. You start observing. You listen longer. You speak less. You treat every interaction as potentially significant because you've seen how often power hides in plain sight. You realize that the person with the least to prove may have the most control, that the quiet presence in the room might be the one shaping the outcome, that the figure everyone overlooks could be holding the thread that connects everything, and once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often people mistake decoration for substance, volume for authority, visibility for relevance. You notice how quickly they reveal themselves around those they think don't matter. And you begin to understand that real power doesn't need to announce itself because it doesn't depend on permission, applause, or acknowledgement. It operates whether it's recognized or not, shaping events while everyone else is busy staring at the surface, laughing at the costume, missing the hand quietly turning the wheel. Intent is the part everyone tries to rewrite after the fact. Outcomes are easier to point at, easier to parade around like evidence, easier to defend when things go wrong or glorify when things go right. People love outcomes because outcomes let them pretend the road they took doesn't matter as long as they arrived somewhere impressive. But intent is quieter, uglier, harder to fake. It's the thought you had before you acted, the reason you moved before you knew how it would end, the truth you don't get. To edit once the choice is made. Two people can do the exact same thing and live in completely different moral universes. One helps to be seen. The other helps because not helping feels wrong. One speaks the truth to look brave. The other speaks it knowing it might cost them everything. The outcome might look identical on the surface, but underneath, the intent tells a very different story. And that story matters more than anyone likes to admit, because intent exposes who you are before luck, timing, or coincidence gets involved. The world is obsessed with results because results are measurable. You can count them, display them, monetize them. Intent can't be graphed. It can't be proven to an audience. It exists in the space before action, where no one else has access. That makes people uncomfortable. It means you can't hide behind success if your motives were right. It means failure doesn't automatically make you wrong if your intent was clean. And most people would rather not live in a world where that distinction matters. Outcomes are often accidents wearing suits. They're shaped by variables no one controls: timing, perception, chance, the decisions of others, the mood of the moment. You can do everything right and still fail. You can do everything wrong and still win. That randomness terrifies people, so they cling to outcomes like proof of worth, like trophies that justify whatever intent they had along the way. If it worked, it must have been right. If it failed, it must have been foolish. Simple, comfortable, completely dishonest intent is where accountability lies. You can't blame the universe for why you acted. You can't point to circumstances and say they forced your motives. You chose them. You carried them into the moment. And even if the result surprised you, even if it exploded in your face or turned into something you never planned, the intent still belongs to you. That's why people rush to explain themselves when things go wrong. They're not defending the outcome. They're desperately trying to salvage how their intent will be perceived. There's also a cruel irony in how intent gets dismissed. People say intentions don't matter, only results do, usually right after their own intentions are questioned. It's a convenient philosophy. It allows harm as long as it's successful. excuses manipulation as long as it's effective, forgives cruelty as long as it produces something impressive. It turns morality into a scoreboard and strips it of any depth. And once you accept that logic, you can justify almost anything as long as it ends well enough. But intent shapes who you become, not just what happens. Outcomes pass. They fade, change, get reinterpreted over time. Intent leaves a mark. It reinforces patterns. It trains your instincts. Every time you act from selfishness, from fear, from ego, from hunger for control, you make it easier to do so again. Every time you act from honesty, restraint, empathy, or principle, you strengthen a different muscle. That shaping happens regardless of whether the world applauds or condemns. The resultant intent also reveals how you see other people. Do you treat them as means to an end or as ends in themselves? Do you help to gain leverage or because you recognize vulnerability? Do you speak to understand or to dominate? Outcomes might hide that for a while, but intent never lies to you. You know when you're using someone. You know when you're manipulating a situation. You know when you're acting out of fear instead of conviction. And that knowledge doesn't disappear just because things worked out. There's a strange calm that comes with acting from clean intent, even when the outcome is chaos. You don't scramble to rewrite history. You don't twist explanations to protect your image. You can sit with failure without it poisoning your identity because you know why you acted. That doesn't make the pain disappear, but it gives it clarity. Acting from corrupted intent, even when it succeeds, creates a different kind of unrest. You're always guarding the story, always afraid someone will look too closely, always aware that the foundation is unstable. Intent matters because it's the only part of the equation you truly control. You don't control how others respond. You don't control timing. You don't control consequences once the action leaves your hands. But you do control why you move, why you speak, why you choose one path over another. And that choice, repeated quietly over time, defines you far more accurately than any outcome ever could, whether celebrated or condemned, whether remembered or forgotten, whether it crowns you or destroys you. Because when everything else is stripped away, intent is what you're left staring at in the dark, when there's no one left to convince. It's strange how belonging makes people uncomfortable. Say you belong to money, power, success, ambition, and no one flinches. Say you belong to something eternal, and suddenly the room goes quiet. Faces tighten. Smiles get polite. Because belonging means surrender, and surrender terrifies a world obsessed with control. I didn't arrive here chasing perfection or pretending to be clean. I arrived bruised, fractured, aware of how easily I break and how often I fail. Belonging wasn't a reward for being good. It was a rescue from becoming empty. Belonging is misunderstood because surrender has been dressed up as defeat for so long that people don't recognize it. When it shows up as strength, they hear the word and imagine chains, loss, submission without dignity. They picture someone kneeling because they were forced there, not because they chose to stop running. But surrender isn't collapse, it's clarity. It's the moment you realize you've been fighting battles you were never meant to win alone, carrying weights you keep pretending make you strong while they're quietly tearing you apart. The world worships control. Control over image, over future, over narrative, over pain. Lose control and you're labeled weak, unreliable, broken. So people cling to the illusion that they're self-made, self-sustained, self-rescuing. They wear exhaustion like a badge and call it independence. But surrender doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you're honest. Honest about limits. Honest about fractures. Honest about the quiet fear that no matter how tightly you grip your life, it keeps slipping through your fingers. Belonging requires surrender, because you can't belong while still trying to sit on the throne. You can't claim an anchor while insisting on steering every storm. Surrender is the moment you stop negotiating terms and accept that your way hasn't delivered the peace it promised. And that terrifies people, because surrender strips away excuses. You can't blame chaos when you've chosen alignment. You can't hide behind ego when you've handed over authority. You don't get to pretend you're fine when you've admitted you're not. Weakness is pretending you don't need help while quietly drowning. Strength is admitting you do and reaching for something solid. instead of flailing harder. Surrender doesn't erase responsibility, it sharpens it. When you belong, your actions matter more, not less. Your choices reflect who you represent. Your failures aren't brushed off, but they're no longer fatal. There's accountability without annihilation, correction without rejection, discipline without abandonment. People confuse surrender with passivity, but surrender is active. It's a decision, not an accident. It's waking up and choosing alignment over impulse, obedience over ego, truth over comfort. It's resisting the urge to crown yourself king every time something goes wrong. It's saying no to the seductive lie that you are enough all by yourself, that you can heal yourself, justify yourself, save yourself if you just try harder. Belonging dismantles the performance. You stop auditioning. You stop building identity out of approval and applause. You stop needing to be impressive to feel secure. That kind of surrender threatens a world addicted to validation. Because when your worth is settled, manipulation loses its grip. Fear loses leverage. Failure loses its power to define you. You're no longer scrambling to prove you matter. You're living from the knowledge that you already do, and that is why surrender is framed as weakness. Because it creates people who can't be controlled the usual way. You can't threaten someone who knows where they belong. You can't bribe someone whose value isn't for sale. You can't destabilize someone anchored to something unshakable. They still feel pain, they still fall, they still wrestle with doubt and desire. But they're not owned by those things. Surrender also exposes the truth about pride. Pride doesn't always look loud or arrogant. Sometimes it looks responsible, disciplined, admirable. Sometimes it hides behind phrases like self-made, independent, resilient. But at its core, pride insists on being the final authority. It refuses to kneel, even when kneeling would heal. Surrender breaks that cycle, not by humiliating you, but by freeing you from the exhausting role of pretending you're invincible. Belonging doesn't erase your personality, it refines it. It doesn't silence your voice, it steadies it. You don't disappear when you surrender, you become coherent. Your contradictions stop fighting each other. Your impulses stop running the show. Your identity stops shifting with the room you're in. And that kind of stability isn't weakness. It's terrifyingly solid. Surrender is not giving up life. It's giving up the lie that you were meant to be your own God. It's stepping out of the chaos of self-rule and into something ordered, intentional, alive. And once you've tasted that kind of belonging, the idea that surrender is weakness starts to sound like a joke told by people who are still pretending. They're not exhausted from holding everything together by themselves. Identity rooted in faith doesn't bend every time the weather changes. It doesn't renegotiate its worth when applause fades or when failure walks in uninvited. Most people build themselves out of circumstances because circumstances are loud. Success tells you who you are when it's winning. Loss tells you who you are when it's losing. Approval flatters you into confidence. Rejection shoves you into doubt. And if that's where your identity lies, you'll spend your life shifting just to survive the room you're in. Circumstances are bullies. They demand explanations, reactions, adjustments. They whisper that you're only as valuable as your last achievement, only as strong as your last victory, only as relevant as your current position. One good season and you feel invincible. One bad season and you question everything. That kind of identity is fragile, constantly negotiating its worth with forces that don't care whether you break in the process. Faith-rooted identity doesn't argue with every storm. It doesn't panic when things fall apart. It doesn't inflate when things go well. It's not impressed by success and not destroyed by failure. That kind of identity was settled before the outcome showed up. It doesn't need circumstances to confirm it because it wasn't built by them. When life applauds, it doesn't get drunk on it. When life mocks, it doesn't collapse under it. People mistake confidence for noise. They think stability has to be loud, offensive, aggressive. But real stability is quiet. It doesn't need to convince anyone. It doesn't scramble for validation. It doesn't rewrite itself to stay acceptable. When identity is rooted in faith, you stop bargaining with the moment. You stop asking situations who you're allowed to be today. You move from response to conviction. Circumstances love to test loyalty. They ask questions like, are you still grounded? when things go wrong? Are you still steady when nothing makes sense? Are you still anchored when prayers feel unanswered and doors stay shut? And that's where negotiation usually begins. People start trimming convictions to fit discomfort. They soften beliefs to avoid tension. They dilute truth to keep peace, because it's easier to bend than to stand when pressure rises. But identity rooted in faith doesn't seek comfort as its primary goal. It seeks alignment. And alignment costs something. It means you might stand alone. It means you might be misunderstood. It means you might look foolish to people who measure life by outcomes and status. But it also means you're not constantly reinventing yourself to survive every season. You're not adjusting your soul to fit the room. You're not letting chaos decide who you are when circumstances define identity. Fear becomes a manager. Fear of loss. Fear of judgment. Fear of being left behind. And fear is efficient. It keeps you compliant. It keeps you flexible in all the wrong ways. Faith-rooted identity fires fear from that role. Fear still shows up, but it doesn't get to make decisions. It doesn't get to redraw boundaries. It doesn't get to rename you. There's a certain calm that comes from knowing who you are before the crisis hits. You don't waste energy asking what this situation says about you. You don't spiral trying to decode meaning from every setback. You endure without dissolving. You adapt without surrendering your core. You walk through loss without letting loss define you. That doesn't make you numb. It makes you resilient in a way circumstances can't steal. People will try to label you based on where they meet you in your journey. When you're up, they'll celebrate you. When you're down, they'll diagnose you. Circumstances make people feel entitled to rename you. Faith-rooted identity refuses the rename. It doesn't argue. It doesn't perform. It simply continues. This kind of identity isn't built overnight. It's formed in tension, reinforced in silence, tested in seasons where nothing makes sense and everything feels delayed. It's strengthened every time you choose conviction over convenience, obedience over impulse, truth over applause. And slowly, you stop reacting to life like it's the authority and start moving through it like you already know who you are. When identity is rooted in faith, circumstances lose their power to redefine you. They can wound you. They can pressure you. They can confuse you. But they can't own you. You don't rise and fall with every external shift. You don't disappear when the lights go out. You don't inflate when things go right. You remain recognizable to yourself even when the world feels unfamiliar, even when the path gets dark, even when nothing around you confirms what you believe, because your identity was never up for negotiation in the first place. Grace is the most offensive idea to a performance-driven world. It disrupts the scoreboard. It laughs at the resume. It refuses to measure worth by output, consistency, or how well you hide your mess. People are comfortable with systems where value is earned, tracked, rewarded, and revoked. Work harder, be better, fail less, prove more. Grace walks into that system and knocks the table over. It says your value was never dependent on how impressive you are or how badly you've messed up, and that truth makes people nervous because it removes leverage. Performance feels safe because it's transactional. Do good, get rewarded. Do bad, get punished. Stay useful, stay accepted. Slip up, get replaced. It's clean, predictable, and brutal. Grace is none of those things. Grace doesn't negotiate. It doesn't ask how hard you tried or how sincere you sound. It doesn't flinch when you fall apart. And because it can't be controlled, it can't be exploited the way performance can. People who live on performance are exhausted even when they look successful. Every win raises the standard. Every failure threatens identity. There's no rest, only maintenance. Smile wider. Work longer. Hide better. Pretend you're fine. Grace interrupts that cycle. It says you are not your highlight reel, and you are not your worst moment either. And that kind of unconditional valuation feels dangerous to people who've built their entire sense of self on earning their place. Failure exposes the cracks in performance-based worth. One mistake, and everything shakes. One bad season, and the labels change. Reliable becomes disappointing. Strong becomes unstable. Admired becomes questioned. Grace doesn't erase consequences, but it refuses to erase you. It separates what you did from who you are, and that separation is revolutionary. It means you can be corrected without being condemned, broken without being discarded, and that's hard to accept because shame likes control. Shame tells you that you must fix yourself before you're allowed to belong. It whispers that you're tolerated at best, replaceable at worst. Grace silences that voice, not by arguing with it, but by ignoring it completely. Grace doesn't wait for you to become acceptable. It meets you where you are and insists you're already seen, already known, already claimed. Success doesn't impress Grace either. That's another insult to the ego. Achievements don't increase your value. Discipline doesn't earn you extra love. Doing everything right doesn't move you up the ladder because there was no ladder to begin with. Grace treats the strong and the weak the same way, and that feels unfair to people who've worked hard to distinguish themselves. It levels the room. It removes hierarchy. It tells everyone to sit down. Living under grace doesn't make you careless. It makes you honest. When your value isn't on the line, you stop lying to protect it. You stop pretending you're better than you are. You stop defending yourself every time you're exposed. You can admit fault without panic. You can face your darkness without collapsing. You don't need to polish your failures into inspirational stories just to justify your existence. Performance motivates through fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of being found out. Grace motivates differently. It pulls instead of pushes. It doesn't say do better or else. It says you're safe, now grow. That kind of motivation runs deeper. It changes behavior from the inside instead of managing it from the outside. It doesn't force obedience. It invites transformation. People misunderstand grace as permission to stay the same. It's not. Grace doesn't excuse the damage you cause or the choices you make. It simply refuses to make your value dependent on perfection. It creates space for real change because change no longer threatens your belonging. You don't evolve to earn love. You evolve because you're loved, and that's why grace is so unsettling. It removes all the familiar tools people use to control themselves and others. No more guilt as a leash. No more shame as a motivator. No more superiority built on moral comparison. Grace leaves you exposed with nothing to hide behind except truth. When performance defines value, you're always acting. When grace defines value, you can finally stop. You don't have to prove you deserve to exist. You don't have to outrun your past. You don't have to keep score to feel secure. You can stand still in the middle of your imperfections without fear of being erased. Grace doesn't make life easier. It makes it clearer. It strips away the illusion that you can save yourself through effort alone. It confronts the ego without crushing it. It humbles without humiliating. And once you realize your value isn't tied to how well you perform or how badly you fail, the whole game changes. The masks start to slip. The pressure loses its grip, and you begin to move through the world without constantly auditioning for permission to belong. Choosing who you belong to isn't a soft decision, it's a violent one. It cuts through habits, impulses, excuses, and identities you've been dragging around because they felt familiar. People like to think decisions are isolated, that you choose this or that in the moment and move on. But belonging sits underneath all of it, quietly steering the wheel while you argue about direction. Who you belong to decides what you tolerate, what you resist, what you justify, what you walk away from. When no one is forcing your hand, most people don't choose who they belong to, they drift. They belong to comfort, to fear, to approval, to whatever keeps the noise down. They belong to moods, to appetite, to the room they're in. And because of that, their decisions look random, inconsistent, contradictory. One day they're brave, the next day they're silent. One day they're principled, the next day they're flexible. Not because they're evil, but because nothing is anchored. Belonging clarifies. Once you know who you belong to, decisions stop being debates and start being filters. Not easy filters, but clear ones. You don't ask what feels good right now, you ask what aligns. You don't ask what gets applause, you ask what's faithful. You don't ask what helps you win the moment, you ask what keeps you intact long term. And that kind of clarity is threatening to a world that thrives on confusion and impulse. Every decision exposes allegiance. How you speak when you're angry. What you do when you're tempted. Who you protect when there's a cost. Whether you stay silent or stand up when silence would be safer. Those aren't personality quirks, they're loyalty tests. They reveal who has authority over you when pressure shows up. And pressure always shows up. Belonging reshapes desire itself. You don't just act differently, you start wanting different things. The cravings that once controlled you lose their volume. The shortcuts that once tempted you lose their shine. Not because you suddenly became disciplined, but because your loyalty changed. When you belong to something higher, lower things don't satisfy the same way. They still call to you, but they don't command you. People say faith complicates life. The truth is, it simplifies it in the most uncomfortable way possible. It removes options. It closes doors you used to keep open just in case. It forces decisions earlier than you'd like. You can't hide in ambiguity forever when belonging has already been declared. You can't pretend you don't know what to do when you've already decided. Who you answer to. Choosing who you belong to also exposes cost. There are things you stop doing not because they're illegal or unpopular, but because they're misaligned. There are conversations you leave, environments you outgrow, opportunities you decline, not because they aren't attractive, but because they would require you to betray something settled. And betrayal always starts small, dressed up as practicality, convenience, or realism. Belonging also changes how you handle failure. When you don't belong to anything bigger than yourself, every mistake is a threat. It questions your worth. It destabilizes your identity. But when belonging is settled, failure becomes correction, not condemnation. You don't spiral trying to protect an image. You adjust, repent, realign, and keep moving. The decision-making process doesn't collapse just because you stumbled. People will misunderstand your decisions when they don't share your allegiance. They'll call you extreme, rigid, naive, outdated. They'll assume you're afraid or controlled because they can't imagine choosing limits willingly. But limits are only cages when you didn't choose what you belong to. When you did, limits become protection, boundaries, direction. Every small decision trains you. What you watch, what you laugh at, what you excuse, what you ignore, what you confront. Those choices don't feel spiritual, but they're deeply revealing. They show who has influence over your instincts. Belonging isn't proven in declarations, it's proven in repetition, in what you do consistently when it would be easier not to. And here's the part no one advertises. Choosing who you belong to means you don't get to blame confusion anymore. You don't get to pretend you didn't know better. You don't get to outsource responsibility to circumstance or emotion. Belonging gives you clarity, and clarity removes excuses. That's why people avoid choosing it. Drifting feels safer than deciding, because drifting lets you claim innocence. But once belonging is chosen, every decision becomes an echo of that choice. Not perfect, not effortless, but intentional. You stop being surprised by your own behavior. You stop waking up wondering how you got here. You start recognizing yourself in your decisions, even the hard ones, even the costly ones, even the ones that make no sense to people who don't know who you belong to and never had to wrestle with the weight of choosing something that shapes everything instead of letting everything shape you.